For Officer Frank Miller and Tony Russo, it was just another day of making extra money on the streets of Sterling Point. And the shiny black Mercedes E-Class, with the beautiful, elegantly dressed black woman behind the wheel, looked like the perfect opportunity presented right in front of them, in broad daylight. The reason for stopping her was ridiculous, a vague lane change, but that was never the point. It was the expensive car, the designer clothes, the preconceived notion that a black woman like her must have acquired her wealth in some shady way. And most importantly, it was the cash they believed they could easily extract from fear. The insinuations, the probing questions, the clumsy theatrics, all were just steps in their familiar blackmail playbook. Finally, the brazen offer, $2,000 in exchange for peace. They saw an easy prey, a victim of racism and their own greed. But there was one thing they completely failed to see. They failed to see the cold calculation behind that seemingly bewildered appearance. And they certainly could not have imagined that the woman they were trying to victimize was no ordinary businesswoman. And the drama of the abusers was about to come to an unexpected end. What truths will be revealed when that perfect cover is blown? And what terrible consequences will these two greedy, racist police officers face for their fatal mistake? What happens next? Listen to this story to discover the shocking twist and surprise ending that awaits. The golden light of a Wednesday afternoon in mid-May spilled down Riverfront Boulevard, a wide paved road that meandered gracefully along the banks of Sterling Point's gentle Serenity River. To the left was the river, shimmering silver in the sunlight, with a few small sailboats lazily drifting along the water. To the right was the vast Central Park, a lush oasis of ancient oak trees, manicured lawns, and paved walking and jogging trails. The air was fresh, with the scent of freshly cut grass and the distinct scent of river water. The scene exuded peace and relaxation, an ideal place for city dwellers to escape the hustle and bustle of downtown. Amidst the idyllic setting, a shiny black Mercedes E-Class glides smoothly and quietly over the road. The sunlight reflects off the car's paintwork, creating sparkling streaks of light. Behind the wheel sits Isabella "Izzy" Moreau, or rather, Isabelle Dubois, the character she plays to perfection. At 35, Izzy possesses a unique hybrid beauty of African Creole Louisiana descent, smooth honey-brown skin, large, deep amber eyes, a high bridge of the nose, and full lips. Her long, naturally wavy hair falls to her shoulders, and she wears delicate pearl earrings. She wears a perfectly tailored black designer suit that accentuates her well-proportioned, well-trained figure. Her gold-rimmed Gucci sunglasses partially obscure her true expression, adding a touch of mystery and elegance. Her demeanor exudes the confidence, calmness, and somewhat aloofness of a successful, wealthy businesswoman accustomed to controlling every situation. But beneath that polished, perfect exterior, Special Agent Isabella Moreau's mind is racing. She has just left Le Jardin Secret, the city's most exclusive French restaurant, after a nearly 2-hour business lunch with a potential business partner. In reality, it was a tense and high-stakes meeting with a key contact in the Nightshade case, a long-running FBI undercover operation to dismantle a large-scale organized crime ring that specializes in money laundering, smuggling, and, in particular, is protected and assisted by a group of corrupt police officers within the Sterling Point Police Department. The cover of Isabelle Dubois, a successful businesswoman in the field of luxury goods importation, is the key to her access and infiltration into this criminal network. Every meeting, every word, every gesture must be carefully calculated, because even the smallest mistake can expose her cover, putting her in an extremely dangerous situation. Izzy let out a soft breath, trying to enjoy the fake relaxation of driving along the idyllic river. The warm sunlight streamed through the windows, but she didn't feel completely at ease. The tension that had been tightening around her during her undercover mission had become second nature. Her vigilance had become second nature. She glanced quickly at the rearview mirror. The Sterling Point Police Department patrol car was still there, a few dozen yards away. It had been hovering behind her since she'd left the restaurant area, at first keeping a distance. But now it seemed to be getting closer. Was it just random patrolling the area? Or were they targeting me? Her instincts told her the latter was more likely. The patrol car looked old, its black and white paintwork scratched, unlike the more recent ones the department had acquired. That could mean it belongs to a less priority area patrol, or to someone who doesn't want to be noticed too much by the modern surveillance equipment on new cars. Inside the patrol car that was following, Officer Frank Miller, a white man in his 40s with thinning salt and pepper hair, a face lined with venom and narrow, cold eyes, smirked. "See the big fish, Russo?" He nudged his younger colleague in the passenger seat. Officer Tony Russo, 30-something, of Italian descent, with slicked-back black hair and a somewhat sly expression, squinted at the Mercedes in front of him. "Nice car, Frank. Latest E-Class. Must be worth $100,000. "It's not just the car." Miller licked his lips, his eyes full of greed. "Look at the driver. A prostitute, but dressed very smartly. Probably the mistress of some new kingpin or a drug dealer who's made a big buck. These guys," he emphasized, his voice full of contempt and prejudice, "always have wallets full of dirty cash. Traveling alone at this hour on a deserted road? It's a delicious treat." Russo laughed crudely. "So what, boss? Some coffee money in this heat of the day?" "Of course." Miller nodded firmly, his eyes showing his boldness. "It's easier to deal with it in broad daylight. Fewer people around, fewer cameras. Find some lame excuse to stop him. You just play the tough cop, I'll do the negotiating. Got it?" "Roger that, boss." Russo puffed out his chest, looking ready for action. Miller glanced around, making sure there were no other cars nearby. He stepped on the gas, and the old patrol car roared to life, speeding toward the black Mercedes in front of him. The red and blue lights on the roof suddenly came on, flashing blindingly in the bright sunlight. Miller let out a short, sharp siren, signaling the car in front to stop. Izzy glanced at the flashing lights in her rearview mirror, her heart constricting slightly, but her face remained perfectly calm. So they were doing it. She took a deep breath, bracing herself for the dangerous action. The net was set. But would she be the hunter or the prey? Only time would tell. She slowed down, turned on her signal, and gently pulled the Mercedes to the side of the road, just under the shade of an ancient oak tree, on a quiet stretch of road, out of sight of the park. The daytime drama was about to begin. The Mercedes E-Class came to a complete stop at the curb, its engine still running smoothly. The patrol car stopped right behind it, its lights still flashing, creating an air of false tension in the otherwise peaceful daytime scene. The police car doors opened almost simultaneously. Officer Frank Miller and Officer Tony Russo stepped out, both wearing dark sunglasses that covered most of their faces, trying to appear cool and unreadable. They moved in a calculated manner. Miller went straight to the driver's window of the Mercedes, while Russo circled around to the back of the car, pretending to check the license plate and taillights, then walked to the right side, standing in a position where he could observe both the driver and the surroundings, forming an asymmetrical pincer movement. Miller tapped twice on the window with his ring knuckle. The tap was dry. He waited a few seconds before speaking, his tone trying to sound professional, but unable to hide his impatience and arrogance. "Hello, ma'am. This is the Sterling Point Police Department. Please roll down your window and show me your driver's license and registration." Inside the car, Izzy took a deep breath, reminding herself of her role as Isabelle Dubois, a successful, slightly arrogant, but fundamentally law-abiding businesswoman. She pressed the button to lower the window just enough to talk and hand over papers, not all the way down to maintain a certain safe distance. A light breeze carried the scent of grass from the park into the car. "Hello, gentlemen," Izzy said, her voice soft, a little surprised but still calm. "Is there a problem, officer? Did I do something wrong?" She slowly opened her expensive Chanel leather purse, taking out her driver's license and car registration, all of them Class A forgeries, meticulously crafted by the FBI's technical division in the name of Isabelle Dubois, with an address at a high-end apartment in the city's upper echelons. Miller snatched the papers from Izzy without a word of thanks. He flipped through them slowly, his eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses, taking in every detail. "The reason we pulled you over is because you made an unsafe lane change on the curve ahead. You nearly endangered other traffic." He gave a vague traffic violation that was hard to verify or dispute on the spot. Izzy raised an eyebrow. "Lane change without signaling? I'm sure I used my turn signal, officer, and I didn't see any other vehicles nearby," she replied politely, but didn't seem intimidated or accepting of the accusation. Izzy's calm and slightly dismissive attitude seemed to irritate Miller. He glanced inside the luxury car, his eyes scanning the high-quality leather interior, the modern dashboard, then stopping at Izzy's expensive clothes and designer handbag placed in the passenger seat. Jealousy and prejudice began to rise more strongly. "Mrs. Dubois," Miller began, his tone of inquiry and meaning, "what kind of job do you have that makes you look so wealthy? Driving fancy cars, wearing designer clothes?" "I'm a businessman, in the import business," Izzy replied briefly, her voice starting to show a little irritation at the invasive question. "Import businessman?" Miller sneered. "Import what? White goods or contraband?" At that moment, Russo, after circling the car, approached Miller's window, speaking loudly so that Izzy could hear. "Hey, Frank, look. There's some white powder under the back of the car, near the exhaust pipe. Also, I smell something strange around here, like chemicals." Of course, it was just a clumsy act. The white powder could just be ordinary pollen or road dust, and the chemical smell was completely fabricated. Miller immediately seized on the excuse, turning to Izzy with a very serious expression. "Did you hear that, Mrs. Dubois? Suspicious white powder, chemical smell. There have been repeated reports of drug dealing and possession in this area of the park. We have every reason to suspect you are involved. By law, we have the right to search your vehicle here, and if necessary, we will detain you in this car and take you to the investigation headquarters for clarification." He deliberately emphasized the negative consequences: arrest, car impounded, reputation affected. Izzy, as Isabel, played the part of a shocked, wronged person. "What? Drugs? What are you talking about? This is ridiculous. I'm an honest businesswoman. I would never do that. You can't search my car without a warrant." She tried to sound a little panicked, her voice rising. Inside, she was saying something else. They were acting too poorly. But this brazenness, they must have done this many times before. She needed to gather more evidence of blackmail. Seeing that his prey was starting to show fear, Miller knew it was time to make the final move. He lowered his voice a little, looking like he wanted to help. "Listen, Mrs. Dubois, you don't look like a professional criminal to me. Maybe this is just an unfortunate misunderstanding, or someone deliberately set you up. Who knows, right?" He shrugged, looking sympathetic. "But you know, once a report is made, the investigation process will be very complicated and troublesome. Searching the car, testing for white powder, interrogating, reporting, will take up a lot of your time, not to mention seriously affecting your business and reputation as a successful businesswoman like you. If the press finds out, it will be very troublesome." He paused, glancing around as if checking for any observers, though the street was still fairly deserted in the afternoon sun. Then he leaned closer to Izzy's window, his voice dropping to a whisper but still loud enough for her to hear. "However, perhaps we, the law enforcement, can be a little flexible in this case. We might consider ignoring the suspicion of the white powder and just issue a traffic violation notice, if you show proper cooperation." He looked straight into Izzy's eyes through his sunglasses. "A little compensation, as a thank you to our brothers for their hard work patrolling under the hot sun. Then perhaps everything can be resolved quickly and smoothly right here. Do you understand what I mean? He gave a specific number but used a finger signal to avoid being recorded if it happened. 2 fingers, meaning $2,000. Not a small number, but not so large that the victim would immediately feel unduly pressured. Russo stood behind Miller, arms crossed over his chest, saying nothing, but his presence and silence were also a clear form of psychological pressure. Izzy looked completely bewildered and frightened by this brazen offer. $2,000? She stammered, her voice shaking. But I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I pay? She looked from Miller to Russo and back to Miller, her eyes trying to convey confusion and hesitation. I don't have that much cash on me. I need to call my lawyer. She deliberately delayed, both to buy time and to gauge their reaction. Miller and Russo looked at each other over their sunglasses. Seeing that their prey seemed to have softened but was still hesitant, Miller decided to increase the pressure. A lawyer? You're just going to make things more complicated if you call a lawyer. We'll have to do the right thing. Search your car, detain you, file a drug possession report. Are you sure you want that? He growled. $2,000 for your freedom and a clean name. I think that's a pretty good price, Mrs. Dubois. Think about it. The extortion was being carried out in broad daylight, on a public road, by the very people who were supposed to uphold the law. Izzy knew that this was a pivotal moment. She needed to make her next decision wisely to close the deal. In that stifling moment in the afternoon sun, while Officer Miller's blatant blackmail proposal still hung in the air, Agent Isabella Moreau, under the guise of bewildered businesswoman Isabelle Dubois, began to put her plan into action. She needed to buy time, gather more incontrovertible evidence, and most importantly, lure these 2 greedy fish into the exact location that the FBI surveillance team had prepared. She let out a fake sigh, her hands shaking slightly on the wheel, a perfectly controlled gesture. Okay, she said, her voice full of reluctance and frustration. I don't want any trouble. But like I said, I really don't have $2,000 in cash. She glanced at Miller, her eyes pleading behind her sunglasses. Could I go to the nearest ATM and get some money? There's a branch not far from here. Miller and Russo exchanged glances over their sunglasses. This was the signal they had been waiting for. The prey had completely surrendered. Miller seemed to think for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but we'll follow your car to make sure you don't pull any tricks. Once you've withdrawn the money, come back here immediately to finish the job. He didn't want to let his prey get away, but he also didn't want to draw attention to himself by following the car or escorting her to the ATM. Yes, I understand, Izzy replied, her voice still shaking. While Miller returned to the squad car to radio briefing, which was probably a sham, Izzy bought a few precious seconds. Her hand moved across the Mercedes' center console, a gesture that looked as natural as adjusting the air conditioning or the radio. But in reality, her finger pressed a tiny, cleverly disguised button near the gear shift. A button that activated the car's built-in hidden audio and video recording device. At the same time, she glanced down at the smartwatch on her wrist, tapping the screen with a predetermined code, sending a Level 2 alert, along with precise GPS coordinates to Supervisory Special Agent David Chen and the Nightshade team overseeing the operation. The signal meant target had taken the bait, was moving toward the backup rendezvous point B, and was ready to go. The Mercedes slowly rolled back onto the road, and the patrol car followed immediately behind. Izzy drove at a moderate speed, heading toward the large Central Park parking lot. Site B, which she had chosen, a place that was spacious enough, had plenty of blind spots but also potential escape routes, and, importantly, had been thoroughly surveyed by the FBI. Her heart was beating a little faster, not from fear, but from excitement and anticipation. Everything had to go perfectly. As the two cars pulled into the relatively deserted mid-afternoon parking lot, Izzy chose a remote corner near a thicket of trees. She stopped the car and turned off the engine. The patrol car stopped a few feet away, and Miller and Russo got out, approaching her car with looks of impatience and greed on their faces. "Hurry up, Mrs. Dubois," said Miller impatiently. "Where is the money?" Izzy took a breath and opened the car door, still holding her Chanel purse. She pretended to rummage through it, looking slightly confused. "Here, I just took it out. There's 2,000. But she did not finish her sentence. At that moment, the FBI's plan was activated perfectly and unexpectedly. Boom! From behind the trees and from other entrances to the parking lot, 3 black SUVs, unmarked and completely normal in appearance, suddenly accelerated at terrifying speed. They quickly blocked all exits from the patrol car and the position where Miller and Russo were standing. The doors of the SUVs opened almost simultaneously. More than a dozen figures dressed in plain clothes but wearing black tactical body armor, wearing woolen hats that covered their faces, and wielding modern assault rifles, quickly jumped out of the vehicles. They moved with the coordinated, silent, and terrifying efficiency of a highly trained Special Forces force. "FBI! Federal agents! Stand! Everyone stand! A strong, authoritative voice boomed from the handheld megaphone of a commanding agent. "Raise your hands over your head! Do not move!" Miller and Russo were in complete shock. The attack had happened so quickly, so unexpectedly, it was like a nightmare in broad daylight. They stood rooted to the spot, their faces white, their eyes wide with horror as they stared at the black muzzles of guns pointed at them from all sides. The greed and complacency of a few seconds earlier had vanished, replaced by paralyzing fear. They had no time to comprehend what the hell was happening. Why was the FBI here? Amidst the controlled chaos, Izzy Moreau calmly straightened up. She leisurely removed her Gucci sunglasses, revealing sharp, cold amber eyes. She reached up to remove the pearl hairpin, letting her thick black hair fall freely. The businesswoman Isabelle Dubois' appearance vanished in an instant. Now, standing before Miller and Russo was a completely different person, a powerful, confident, and dangerous female federal agent. She walked slowly and steadily toward the 2 police officers who were being held at gunpoint by her FBI colleagues. When she was only a few feet away, she stopped and pulled out a shiny gold metal badge from her vest pocket, clearly engraved with the Federal Bureau of Investigation badge and her title. She held the badge high in front of Miller and Russo, her voice clear, cold, and emotionless. "Officer Frank Miller, Officer Tony Russo. Listen carefully." Her eyes swept over the 2 faces, which were contorted with terror. "I am Special Agent Isabella Moreau of the Organized Crime and Public Corruption Unit, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are hereby arrested under federal law for the following crimes: color of law extortion, conspiracy to commit a crime, and violation of federal civil rights protected by Section 242, Title 18, United States Code." Izzy's every word was like a sledgehammer to Miller and Russo's already panicked minds. FBI, Special Agent, Corrupt Practices Unit, federal civil rights violations. It was all happening so fast, so horribly. It finally hit them. The beautiful black woman they had despised, disparaged, and tried to blackmail so brazenly was no easy prey, no weak businesswoman. She was an FBI agent. They had walked straight into a perfectly laid trap. They had handed over irrefutable evidence of their crimes to the very people who were investigating them. The collapse was instantaneous and complete. Miller gasped, stuttering something incoherent, his legs shaking as if they were about to collapse. Russo was pale, his eyes filled with despair, his eyes squeezed shut as if to escape the harsh reality. Their dream of making quick money through power and prejudice had turned into their worst nightmare. They faced not only years in prison for simple extortion, but also serious federal charges that could have landed them in a harsh federal prison for decades. The FBI's net, set patiently and secretly, had finally collapsed in broad daylight. Miranda rights were read clearly to each, but both remained silent, not saying a word, their faces blank and white. The scene of the arrest was immediately cordoned off with yellow tape by FBI agents. Federal forensic teams quickly arrived, meticulously collecting every piece of evidence: the officers' guns, their patrol car, which would be thoroughly searched later, and most importantly, the secret audio-video recording device from Agent Moreau's Mercedes, which contained the entire conversation and indisputable images of Miller and Russo's extortion, abuse of power, and racist rhetoric. News of the FBI arresting 2 Sterling Point police officers in broad daylight on suspicion of corruption and extortion spread like wildfire, causing a real shockwave within the city's police department and among the public. The city's police chief and mayor immediately held an emergency press conference to reassure the public and pledge full cooperation with the federal investigation. Captain Eva Rostova, the precinct chief where Miller and Russo worked, and a person with a reputation for integrity, was put in charge of an internal investigation in parallel, working closely with the FBI. Frank Miller and Tony Russo were immediately suspended without pay, pending the outcome of the investigation and prosecution. The FBI investigation, with its initial evidence so solid from the bust, went beyond the extortion of Agent Moreau. It expanded in many directions. Agents began to dig into Miller and Russo's records, interview colleagues, and review past complaints against the two that may have been overlooked or mishandled. They also analyzed Miller and Russo's financial connections, phone calls, and other suspicious relationships, trying to determine whether their corruption was sporadic and isolated or part of a larger, organized network linked to the criminal network targeted by Operation Nightshade. The arrest of the 2 corrupt cops, while an unexpected incident in the undercover operation, turned out to be a major breakthrough, providing valuable clues and evidence for the larger investigation. With the ironclad evidence from the FBI's audio-video recording equipment, along with the detailed and credible testimony of Special Agent Isabella Moreau, the legal fate of Frank Miller and Tony Russo was all but sealed. They no longer had any opportunity to deny or quibble. Faced with serious charges in federal court, the two could have tried to blame each other or strike a plea deal to reduce their sentences, but federal prosecutors, determined to clean up law enforcement and deter similar behavior, pursued the case to the end. The trial of Miller and Russo attracted special attention from the media and public. The image of 2 former police officers standing in the dock, heads bowed, listening to accusations of corruption, abuse of power, and racism became a sad symbol of the dark side that can exist in the hearts of those entrusted with the task of protecting justice. The audio and video recordings released in court, after processing sensitive information, exposed the greedy, cruel, and prejudiced faces of the 2 defendants, causing outrage not only to the jury, but also to those attending the trial. The final sentence was not surprising: 7 years in federal prison for each defendant on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. They were also permanently dismissed from the police force, losing their pensions and all other benefits. The harsh sentences not only served as a fitting punishment for Miller and Russo's crimes, but also sent a loud and clear message from the federal justice system. Corruption and racism in law enforcement will not be tolerated in any form. After completing her role as a key witness in the case against Miller and Russo, Special Agent Isabella Moreau quietly returned to her cover as Isabelle Dubois, continuing to infiltrate deeper into the criminal network of the Nightshade operation. The arrest of the 2 corrupt police officers, although exposing her to some subjects in the police department, also provided invaluable intelligence and created necessary turmoil in the ranks of corrupt police, paving the way for the FBI's next breakthroughs. Sitting alone in her Mercedes E-Class, Driving through the familiar streets of Sterling Point under the evening streetlights, Izzy couldn't help but reflect on what had happened. The incident once again showed the dangerous and toxic intersection of two of society's most vexing issues: corruption and racism. Blind prejudice not only leads to injustice, but can also become fertile ground for power to corrupt, creating opportunities for opportunists to profit and harm the community. When people with prejudice are given power and weapons, the consequences can be dire. She also thought about the audacity of evil, how such serious wrongdoings could take place in broad daylight, on a seemingly peaceful street. That showed that the fight against corruption and discrimination requires constant vigilance, courage to confront, and perseverance from everyone, especially from those working in the public system. The job of an undercover FBI agent like her is always full of dangers, temptations, and the dark side of human nature. But every time she witnesses justice being served, every successful catch, big or small, gives her more strength and faith in the mission she has chosen. She is a silent warrior, fighting in the dark to protect the light, to protect the core values of fairness, integrity, and equality, especially for the weak voices, the communities most vulnerable to abuse of power and prejudice. The fight is long, and there are many challenges ahead. But Agent Isabella Moreau knows that she will never be alone. And she will never stop fighting. Her eyes are fixed straight ahead, steadfast and determined, ready to face whatever the night and this city bring. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.